Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
So you are listening to the Seattle Shrimp Tank, streaming to you live on Facebook. You can catch us generally every other week on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time from the virtual Whedon Unleashed studio here on Facebook until we resume broadcasting in our physical studio. I'm Brad Berger, along with my esteemed co-hosts Dan Whedon and Annie Vernon. You can always catch a replay of the podcast at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and now through iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes so you never miss an episode. And if you are subscribed, please rate our podcast on any medium that you take it on, including iTunes. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. Today is a very special podcast because it is our 100th episode. We'll celebrate this episode by taking a one-year look back and reflecting on our shows from the past year. And what a year it has been.
Brad, I don't think that when, we were ending 2019 and we were making the calendar for 2020 on the Shrimp Tank podcast, I would have to say that neither of us, and Andy included in that, none of us expected what happened just around the beginning of March, maybe even end of February, started getting an inkling, but to think that here we are in October and we have not had a live in-studio event. Here's a trivia quiz for you guys. Since what guest? Who was our last guest that we had live?
Good question. I'm going to go with Matt Biondi.
Yeah, Matt, Biondi Media.
It was Matt Biondi. I remember we elbow bumped because at that time, it was probably the first Thursday in March, we elbow bumped. No masks at the time. We did go down and have a nice libation and after eats, that was the last one. So who would have thunk that all these months later, we are still virtual, but yet the show goes on.
Absolutely.
And guys, I think that should be kind of our message today to everybody listening. The show must go on.
That's right.
And I'd love to chat a little bit and get your perspectives, not only on what we've been through, but what we should expect moving into 2021.
Dan, I wanted to make a quick comment because your comment about going and having a libation with Matt after the show, that was probably one of the last restaurants you went to for a while.
You know what? I hadn't thought of it.
Think about it. There were months where it was all takeout, and I'm trying to think of for myself because they're entrepreneurs as well. When the first time following the shutdown, I went to an actual restaurant and sat down and ate.
Yeah, well, you know what? Yeah. That's funny. I had not thought of it. Actually, it's ironic. The two places. So we're going to, by the way, all of you guests, we're going to do our best to get guest names in and give them some promo, but we've had 100 episodes. So we'll do the best. I encourage everybody to just go check out all of the guests we've had over the years. But the two places that I went since this, one was Crabtree Kitchen, because they have a really cool thing. They have, because they're a LEED building, the airflow is not recirculating air. It comes in, gets pumped out. So it's always fresh air coming in. So we've gone a couple times there. And then once outdoors to 11 Winery, Matt Albee. So Peter Crabtree at Crabtree Kitchen, and then Matt Albee at 11. Those are the only two places I've been.
Well, it wasn't a guest, but as Andy brings this up, we had the opportunity. We actually saw each other today. So the fact that we're Zooming at the moment, we had a lunch appointment, and I can honestly tell you that that is the first time during this entire time that I have ate in a restaurant indoors.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
So today what was it? I have not eaten indoors at a restaurant since before this all began. So so just to speak to that, and
by the way, our intrepid
my health club.
Yeah.
And it was a ghost town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our intrepid producer, Sue, it was March 4th. Matt Biondi was March the 4th.
Yep.
So, you know, it is kind of a strange thing. I'd like to ask you guys this, and because we're each other's interviewees for this, and the folks listening and hopefully watching live and watching this later, I'd like to get both of your takeaways just briefly on what you've seen from the guests that we've had, especially the last 7 months, during all of them having to make some concessions, some pivoting, all of that. Talk a little bit about what you've learned about the spirit of entrepreneurs from our guests.
Well, I think I'll jump in on that, because I think that you hit one of the words just in that intro, Dan, and that's pivoting. And I think the other one is word that I would choose would be flexible. And the third word is creative. And I choose those words because that's what I've observed. But, you know, Dan, it really, I think, went back to the spirit, to your point, that got them into their business. That not the throwing total caution to the wind in a destructive, non-ecological way, but saying, you know what, I've got this, I can do this, I can figure it out. It was that same spirit in being able to do that, that when confronted with this particular situation, the attitude was, you know, I'll figure it out. Let me use one of our most recent guests.
Yeah.
So we had Bob on from Tilting Motorworks.
Yeah.
Right. And what I thought was really interesting about that was just a classic demonstration of this, because, of course, he tells a story on that podcast about how he got to where he was, where he had started down one path. And that path was going to be to create from scratch these motorcycles. And his run-in with the law, as we talk about in there. And really what that was is him having to go to the Washington State Patrol to have the bike inspected. And he said, do you know why you're here? And that revelation that the reason that you're here is that this is scratch built, right? Whereas if what you were doing was simply modifying an existing frame that already had a VIN number assigned to it, you'd never darken our door again. And that was an opportunity that I think that I see in a lot of our guests who run a lot of our companies, who have been successful at being able to survive this, to say, you know, when you know, to recognize that moment, right? To say, well, can I give up where the direction I thought I was going to go and create for myself an even bigger, better enterprise with more diversity? And so there's a classic example that comes to mind on a super recent guest.
Hey, Andy, before you go, I think, Brad, it's seeking opportunities. It's being open to opportunities. I think unfortunately, there are people out there who, in the midst of crisis, only see closed doors. And I think the entrepreneurs that we talk to are constantly seeking, is there a crack in a door open? Can I see some daylight through there and charging through? Andy, what do you think?
You know, this is a slightly different conversation than the question you kind of have posed, Dan. But one of the guests that I was able to be a part of, and one of the shows I was on, was Algelin Sperber, if you remember.
Yeah.
CEO and the founder of Ladybox.
Right.
And at the time, you know, we're all familiar with kind of the mail order model, right? When you think about a Stitch Fix and all of the different, you know, Blue Apron and all the different services that now are trying to deliver what they deliver, you know, kind of direct to home through the mail. And I think about this because, you know, it's very interesting to see how things played out when you had this incredible, unprecedented event, which was a coordinated global shutdown. And yet some businesses, which were not really built for that at all, it created just incredible challenges for. And other businesses, it created this incredible opportunity for and highlighted kind of their unique nature. And for sure, the mail order businesses, because you've seen the pickup in advertising where they sort of sense this opportunity. And Aljalyn Sperber was no different, where, you know, as it was in the environment that she was in pre-pandemic, you know, she's competing against grocery stores and, you know, and Rite Aid and things like that, where people would normally go and get their feminine products on a regular basis. And some people might sort of scratch their heads and say, why do I need something like this in mail order form? And yet suddenly you get into a pandemic where, you know, your typical traditional options aren't as easy anymore. And suddenly this option, it just highlights the convenience and the ease. And I doubt that Aljalyn, you know, as she was building her business model, would have thought about constructing a business model that was pandemic proof, right? She probably didn't think much about that coming into 2020. And yet here you have a business model that was pandemic proof and was built for this kind of environment. So I think about her, along with, you know, some of the challenges that our other guests face, but her business model sort of stood out as one which likely benefited from an event like this.
Well, by the way, Aljalyn and Lady Box were featured in a very recent article inside of South Sound magazine.
They were.
Great.
Yes.
They were. Yep.
Yeah.
They certainly were.
Yep.
So listen, guys, here's one. Here's a guest that we had whose business you would have said at the outset was not pandemic proof. And that's Vanessa Smith and Blue Ribbon Cooking, right? Yep. She's doing events. She's doing cooking classes. She's doing catering. Right. Everything about their business, everything was about people gathering, being in close proximity, all of it. And when Brad, when you
being
and I
around food
and around food and hands, no masks, everything. There was nothing about what she did that you could look. I would have, you know what? I like to think I'm a resilient guy, but I think I might have broke down and cried if I was in her position. She's very tough. And in talking with her, they went to work creating situations where individuals, especially in their cooking classes, could be isolated. They were doing takeout. There was so many things that they turned on a dime on. I think in talking, I don't think they lost any employees. I think no. They're still busy. And when you look at something like that, it blows my mind to think of, here's someone who said, oh no, you can't stop me. You can't shut me down. I'm going to find a way. And again, she's not the only one. We talked to a lot of them, but I think that there's that can do, find the sliver of light, and I'm going to go through that door.
Well, the other one that immediately came to mind when you mentioned that too, Dan, was David Dockstetter of the Workshop.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So somebody, and that was and the common thread was they didn't allow the situation to paralyze them. Right.
Right.
There may have been a period of time when, like we were saying earlier, well, it's just 2 weeks, it's 2 weeks or 2 weeks. But I think one of the main points that most of these businesses had was they didn't let more than 2-week periods go by before they said, and now we have to pivot.
Yep,
and,
right.
and now we have to change. So that was another thing, which was an early assessment and an early realization. And I think that's kind of the vision, right, of these entrepreneurs, to basically say, this is going to be different. And I have got to, for my own survival, make a decision about what if this is the way that it's going to be for an extended period of time.
So, and before we go to break, it's interesting because this is my business. I can tell you that I never, not back in November or December, did I ever tell a client, hey, the whole world is going to shut down to the point that there's no college or professional sports. There's no Broadway. Heck, you're not even going to be able to go to a restaurant. People would have thought I was nuts. But I still remember at a point in March, I'll never forget, I was sitting here in my office, and in my head, I started thinking, what if I can never leave my house again? Now, I knew I'd be able to, but I really thought, I've got to think in those terms. What if I can never leave again? And I've gotten so used to being in front of people, yet I've been working from home for 15 years. And so in my head, I had to start creating a new plan. For me, it was much easier than many of our guests who had different types of products and services. But I think we still, at this point, as we head into 2021, which I'd like to talk a little bit about, is, okay, folks, we've been through this. Now what? What does 2021 look like? Are you guys ready to talk a little bit about that when we come out of the break?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Excited to. Dan, I may have one more entrepreneur that I want to mention, but we'll get to that after the break.
Okay, sounds good. So everybody, we're going to take that first break. When we come back, we will continue with our 1-year look back special. And by the way, for all the guests, I've decided I'm going to scroll their names. I'm going to edit this before I send it off to Atlanta. We'll make sure everybody's name appears on it if you are a guest this year. So don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Seattle Shrimp Tank.
The Seattle Shrimp Tank is brought to you by IdealLife360.com. What would it be like to be in the best shape of your life, both physically and mentally, every day for the rest of your life? Have awesome relationships with the people you care about most. Never having to worry about money again. What would it be like if you received a letter out of the blue and suddenly discovered you had 20 more years to live than you ever imagined? What would you do with those extra years of your life? How many lives would you touch? What kind of legacy would you leave behind? What changes would you make today knowing you had 20 more years in your future? What new, big challenges would you take on? What would be next? Text the word IDEAL to 89800 and discover how to rethink, redefine, and reinvent the best years of your life.
Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank from the virtual Whedon Unleashed studio, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in Seattle and the greater Puget Sound area. I'm Brad Berger, along with my esteemed co-hosts Dan Whedon and Andy Vernon. Remember, you can always catch a replay of the podcast at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or catch us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. For our next segment of
and
1-year look backs.
We may not have an exact hot or not, but we do need to thank our shrimp peelers, West Sound Workforce, Port Ludlow Resort, Kitsap Economic Development Alliance, SJ Graphics, and the Kitsap Sun. So I've got a question to pose to you both that relates to moving forward. And it goes like this. I was in a meeting yesterday with a number of different advisors, and a couple of these advisors were employers of groups of people. So I know one had 40 employees, the other was probably in the 20 to 30 range. And one of the interesting things that they said was, we get reaching out to customers and clients. We have that down. We figured out kind of this secret to making sure that we stay connected. Here's what we're struggling with: doing that internally with our employees. The employees are challenged by being virtual all the time, and we haven't quite figured out that. So I thought it was interesting that they said, we've got this external thing, but we don't have the internal. So as we look at 2021, guys, what advice would you give to employers out there who might still be looking at 3, 4, 5, even 6 months potentially before people get back into offices or businesses? Take it away.
Well, one of the things that I think is going to be, necessary, because we have found it with our clients, and that is video conferencing. I think one of the things that's easy to do, especially when it becomes habit, when you're in an office with a whole bunch of individuals that you normally see either throughout the day or at physical meetings, we've kind of developed this habit of picking up the phone, right, and just dialing their extension. And so that's a pattern that we've created in our lives about how we communicate internally on a team. Inside our offices where Andy and I spend a lot of our time, it's just very easy to pick up the phone, dial the extension, hit the extension number, et cetera. And I think that habit needs to be broken, and that many of the meetings that we now have to have, there seems to be this kind of, I don't want to call it laziness, but a lack of acknowledgement maybe that even within our team, we need the physical, albeit if it's virtual, a connection, to be able to see people, to see their faces, to see their expressions, to, continue to have the banter, the playful banter that goes along when you've got a really cohesive team.
Right.
And as well as just like we schedule time with clients, if people aren't already doing that, I think they need to do that, because one of the things that we don't want to do, I mean, there's a good side and a bad side to what we've all just been through. But I remember very vividly a meme that I was shown early in the pandemic when we all kind of went home, and we were all going to work from home, or at least in our case, half of our crew went remote to protect the other half and to make sure that the office could always stay open. We would switch the teams out if one of us became ill. And that was, we're going to find out which of these meetings could have been done by email.
That's right.
Right. And so the problem with that is, I think that there then is this tendency to have the pendulum swing to one extreme, which is we don't need to get together. We don't need to see people. We can just do all this via email or by teleconference. And I'm going to share with you that I think one of the most effective things that teams need is personal interaction.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Andy, do you want to tag on to that a little bit? You've got your clients talking about, hey, what are some things we can do to keep a morale up in all of this?
Yeah, and there's so much we could talk about with this issue, Dan. It's going to be interesting to see how it evolves, particularly in big cities. We all kind of live around Seattle, but whether it's Olympia or whether you go to the East Coast, and there's been a whole lot of discussion around, huge cities like New York City, where, without those workers coming in, it's going to sort of radically change the complexion of things. And I think Seattle is to some degree similar, because you've got big employers like Amazon, and even though Microsoft is out in Redmond, they've got employees who are downtown, Google, Facebook, and all those employees were very easily sent home to work remotely without really any sort of hiccups in how they sort of deliver their business. But you mentioned it earlier that, at some point there's an exhaustion there, and there's two kind of factors I think about. One is what you lose in terms of communication and collaboration. And so there's kind of a productivity issue. But I think for some people, there's a desire to be back where there are social elements, there are team elements, and there are things that simply, you're not going to replicate in kind of a virtual way. And so there's a lot of talk about kind of these hybrid models where you might have, a few days a week where you come into the office, and then a few days a week where you're home, or you're home on Friday, something like that. And that's really where I see things going, where you get the best of both worlds, and you've got some efficiency there, because to Brad's point, some meetings could be an email, but I think that it's not just employers. I think that some employees, and I was one of them, will have a desire to come back to work and be, more productive, have more collaboration. And that's not just for the technology or the creative fields. I think there are a lot of areas where there's going to be this acknowledgement over time that they've got to bring people together in much the same way that, how we deliver service. Listen, we can do it virtually, but our preference is to do it in person in many instances. And so having the option to do both, I think, is going to be important. And I'm going to be watching this and sort of seeing how it evolves. But I know that all of our entrepreneurs are sort of mindful of this, and mindful of the issue that you bring up, Dan, with the exhaustion for some employees when, I just can't imagine my life where I'm always sort of staring at a screen, and that's going to be how I work. I just don't see it, that being the way things are, 2-3 years out.
So I want to bring something out because you mentioned the word exhaustion, and Andy, I think your face is frozen. I think there's a
It is.
joke there somewhere along. Because I'm moving, right?
He's a ventriloquist.
He,
And
you
so
know
do you
what?
see
If this
his lips are
financial
not moving?
yeah, if this financial advisor thing, Andy, doesn't work out, ventriloquism, you could do a show in Vegas.
No, I want to be one of those human statues and paint myself silver and stand up in a public area.
Your lips don't even move. You're fantastic. But you know, one of the things I was thinking of, guys, and I had this very conversation with the client last week, and it's the concept of self-care. It's a concept of self-care, and my specific is to those of you who are entrepreneurs and business owners and CEOs, because I think you put out so much effort to take care of your clients, to take care of your employees, that often self-care, that can go out the window. And so, Brad, I know Ideal Life 360 and all the work you've done there, self-care is an important part of it.
Yeah.
Self-care to me, by the way, is not just exercising. It's what you say to yourself, right?
Right.
It's how you treat yourself. And by the way, it's also cutting yourself some slack, which I know for many of our perfectionist bent CEOs, that's hard to do. Can you talk a little bit from a life balance and a self-help? Talk about the combination of what you're saying to yourself, how you're feeling, and then the health part of it.
Yeah, it's a perfect tee up there, Dan. So one of the things that I do with Ideal Life 360 is I run a regular webinar series. We're in our third one of 2020. It was our original plan in 2019 to run these. The one that I'm doing right now, we are halfway through. It's on calling and purpose. And we really start to break down things like conversations around self-limiting beliefs, around paradigms, around asking questions like, is it really true? And I will share with you that there has been no better opportunity, I think, because the harried schedule for many individuals of commuting, right? Has opened up, I hope, for many individuals, a little bit of extra time and a little bit of extra space to really think about this. And it was interesting because among the exercises that I did just this past week was this concept around me time or you time, depending upon who we're speaking about. But it's the time that you dedicate to you. And whether that's 15 minutes a day of, meditation or praying or thoughtful reflection on things, do you have time for yourself? And I will share with you that the first alarm bell that should really be going off in people's minds, if they say, I don't have time for that, right there is the identification of a problem, because we cannot be complete human beings, nor can we be as effective as we can be as human beings if we don't first focus, on ourselves. And that brings up one other thing that's somewhat of a tangent on this, because of course, one of the areas that Ideal Life 360 and myself are particularly passionate about is vital lifelong alignment and longevity. Of course, some of you may know I follow Dr. Eric Plasker and have an affiliation with the 100-Year Lifestyle. And Dr. Plasker approached me and asked me to write an article as it related to a financial bent, because career and finance is an area that I have a lot of expertise in, on being a least vulnerable person financially. But it was part of a series that I really embraced, which was being a least vulnerable person. And I think that really gets to this, and it will also tie into the business, because I want to bring up an area of talk about, business continuity plans. I'm kind of living one today, which I'll explain, but we're also living through one with this pandemic. But if there's one thing I think that this virus and this pandemic has shown us is the importance of self-care, of having a good mindset, as well as being healthy physically. And that is that, as they say, those who are succumbing to the virus at a larger percentage than the general population, the common theme is they have one or more comorbidities. They have one or more conditions that make them a vulnerable person. So the thing that I've taken away from this, and I try to talk to a lot of Ideal Life 360 clients about, is how are you positioning yourself to be a least vulnerable person?
Well, and that's great. I know, and thank you very much for that, Brad. I know Andy has something he wants to say on this, but Andy, I'm going to do it on the backside of this commercial. Let me get this out, and then I'll bring it to you. We are going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors, and when we come back, we will continue with our one-year look back and our waxing poetic special. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Seattle Shrimp Tank.
The Seattle Shrimp Tank is brought to you by our studio sponsor, Weeden Unleashed. As a business owner, you don't have a professional life or a personal life. You have a life. And that life is full of opportunities and obstacles. Your business is the fuel of your life. If you run out of fuel because of a crisis, your entire lifestyle is affected. Dan Weeden works with small and medium-sized business owners to ensure that no calamity is fatal. Dan focuses on accelerating business growth while at the same time planning and implementing strategies on preventing, mitigating, and recovering from those obstacles of business and life. Through Dan's consulting work and his partnership with First Underwriters Insurance to finance your risk, he'll make sure that you, with confidence, unleash the value of your business and lifestyle. To get a complimentary review of your situation, call Dan at 360-271-1592 or email Dan at dan@danweeden.com. Tell Dan you heard him on the Seattle Shrimp Tank podcast and receive a 20% discount on any work that is agreed to. Be unleashed and be well.
Welcome back to the Seattle Shrimp Tank from the virtual Weeden Unleashed studio, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in Seattle and the greater Puget Sound area. I am Brad Berger, along with my esteemed co-hosts Dan Weeden and Andy Vernon, and you can always catch a replay of the podcast at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or catch us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And to continue our one-year look back special edition, I know that Andy's got a comment, but I want to come back to you as soon as Andy's done. Talk a little bit about business continuity plans.
Sounds good. Andy,
yeah,
ventriloquist away.
Yeah, I did not want to miss the opportunity as we're sort of talking about mental health and self-care and some of those issues that I think have been brought to the fore because when you see a massive dislocation, as we've sort of witnessed, it does put a lot of stress on a lot of people. And so it's been well documented, or at least acknowledged, that there are sort of more mental health issues, and you've got to have a higher sort of awareness of that. And of course, whenever I think of that, I think back to our guest in January. If the two of you remember Ashley Keys, this was not a show that I was part of, but it was a show that I listened to and have gotten to know Ashley over the past few years and her work at the Keys Medical Group with patients with depression. And I would love to hear sort of her kind of feedback. It would be great if we could get her on for sort of a moment to
follow up.
Consider, how she might have responded, because here you have an environment where clearly the need has increased and demand for what she does for patients is going to go up. And at the same time, you're going to have challenges sort of delivering what you deliver to patients. And I'm sure she, like a lot of our entrepreneurs, had kind of a pivot there. But her perspective would be very interesting. And for sure, we look at the kind of stress that it can cause when you have, things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, but like we've mentioned, just being inside and sort of not able to go to work and kind of having to deal with family in different ways. There'd be all sorts of ways in which that would be disruptive. But I wanted to take the opportunity to mention that and to look back on that conversation that we had with Ashley.
So, Dan, I want to ask you about something because I know this is in the risk work that you do, is something that you helped us with. And when I say us, now I'm going to put my hat on when in the firm that Andy and I own and operate, our financial planning firm, because one of the things that I've mentioned is that we do have a business continuity plan. And we were able to execute that business continuity plan flawlessly. And we had in place not only the plan, but we had the technology to be able to do that. We meet with clients all over the world. Many of our clients are here in the Puget Sound area, but many of our clients live abroad. They live in Australia, they live in Italy, they live in Germany. They're expatriates who travel the world. I mean, it's the gambit. And in between our opportunity to see those individuals in person, we've had to work with them virtually. And of course, we have all sorts of technology that allows us to answer my quote desk phone, of which I do have a physical desk phone, but this is also my, oh, you can't really see it. There's the back of it, right? And let me see, you can see it on the back of my phone is my desk phone now, because I can answer the phone everywhere that we have. And what I told clients is it was a really easy decision for us. We made a decision at a Monday morning meeting that half of the team was not coming back into the physical office so that we could physically distance, that we were an essential business. We were going to remain open, even though we could work completely virtually. We thought it was important that our clients know that our physical location, at least our primary headquarters, was open for business. And if they needed, for whatever reason, within the rules to meet with us, that they could. But I also said, the issue there that's made this pandemic different than what my business continuity plan called for is that business continuity plan had to do with things such as volcano eruptions, Mount Rainier, had to do with tsunamis, the Puget Sound, and those sorts of things. It didn't deal with the pandemic. And one of the things that's made this pretty easy is that those natural disasters would have caused significant disruption of a vital service. And that would be the internet. And I would say with you too, is the reason that I'm in our office today in Bellevue, Washington, and I'm not in my home office in Bellevue, Washington, is that just 3 miles from here where my home is, we haven't had electricity now in almost 24 hours. And so I would just love your perspective, Dan, on what life might be like and what business could be doing to plan around the fact that, thank goodness that we all have the internet, because that's what's allowed us to be able to pivot and do the things that we're doing.
Right. Yeah. 30 years ago, things might have been a lot different before this. So a couple thoughts. Thanks for asking, Brad. A couple thoughts. Number one is that everybody, every small and medium-sized business and large business has implemented their business continuity plan this year. The problem is that only 14% actually had a written, thought out, pre-planned business continuity plan. The other 86% did not. They kind of went by the seat of their pants. And so my message to anybody who will hear this, and my message to clients and prospective clients is that fire, whatever that fire is, it could be a cyber crime, it could be an auto accident, it could be the death of a key person, whatever that calamity is, does not care that you've been through COVID. It doesn't care. It's piling on. And so what now needs to happen more than anything for businesses, we've found our way to cope through this, but we can't necessarily afford to keep having more things happening. Now is the right time to plan. You mentioned loss of power and connectivity. That pre-COVID, that was about 71% of business continuity failures came from a loss of power and connectivity. And so we're in a first world country that can deal with that pretty quickly. But what happens if, I mean, nothing's off the table anymore. One final thought on that, and we'll kind of maybe do a wrap on everything. Something happened a couple weeks ago that should catch people's attention, not from a political standpoint, from a business one. I wrote on this for my blog. We saw the President of the United States go into the hospital. We watched him enter into Marine One, go to the hospital, and a lot of discussion was on the 25th Amendment and succession. And I knew the first 3 or 4 succession to the president that got put into place during the Franklin Roosevelt presidency. And I didn't know, I had to do it goes like 8 deep. And so my question for all of my business friends out there is, how deep does your business succession plan go?
It should go to at least the Director of Urban Development.
Yeah, or it was the Interior Director, the Secretary of the Interior. But at the very least, think about this. Who's the backup? If we always talked about the CEO getting hit by the bus, what if the CEO gets COVID?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
what happens if that CEO who's in charge of relationships, who's in charge of sales maybe, you have a small business, 25 people, that can kill the business right there. So having a plan in place, not only for operations, but for people. And it might not be the CEO, it might be your director of sales. It might be somebody. Having that human redundancy is also critically important. Something I hope we found out from this.
So Andy, I think you've got a comment.
I did. It was just a follow on to your comment because you mentioned things like volcano eruptions and tsunamis, which I don't think that would have been a very serious comment a year ago.
Right.
And yet here we are, right? Because I mean, we would have thought, well, that's never going to happen. And yet here we are in the middle of a global pandemic. And don't forget, Dan, the event that I thought you were going to mention was the wildfires that we experienced out west about a month ago. And how disruptive those were because you weren't going outside. And again, we don't necessarily think of that because we can operate virtually. But if you were a restaurant that was trying to serve customers, that would have greatly sort of impacted you. And then my other comment was, given that anything has been possible in a year like 2020, I always want Brad to be careful when he mentions these things because there's still time to squeeze in the famine and pestilence this year.
Well, you know, and I think we probably are getting to the end and are going to transition out, but I'll leave it with this. And Andy, thank you. I could have thought about the wildfires too. Those have been crazy. Although you look back, we've had some wildfires over the last couple of years. So one thing is, I think all of us are very confident in the future. And, you know, as we talked prior to this, I think we all got caught into this. It's going to only take 2 more weeks. It's only going to be 2 more weeks. It's going to be by July. It's going to be by school. And I think what all good, sophisticated and savvy entrepreneurs and people are doing with their lives and their businesses are saying, okay, enough of that. We're moving on. We've got to live our lives within the rules, within safe and health, but we can't just think this is the way it is. And until something different changes, we've got to find a way to survive and to thrive. And so I know that moving into 2021, all of our guests and all of our future guests and all of the people listening will tighten up. Might be another heck of a ride, but let's do the journey together.
Yeah, you bet. So I think we're at our time. So we want to thank everybody so much for listening to our program today. We thoroughly enjoyed looking back at all the successes and lessons shared by our intriguing guests over this past year and the observations that we had about that. And we hope that you did too. Our next show from the virtual Whedon Unleashed studio will be Wednesday, November 4th, 2020, where our next guest will be Nick Hughes with Founders Live Media. Make sure you check out all the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And remember, to become a shark, we all start out as shrimps.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp